Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Vivian Louie. I'm the director of the Asian American Studies Program and Center here at Hunter College, where I'm also a professor of urban policy and planning. We're so delighted to welcome you tonight to our first event of spring 2022, a screening of the amazing film Confetti. Confetti is about the journey of a young girl and her mother from China to New York City, and the large journey of identifying and responding to the young girl's dyslexia. A panel discussion will follow, and the film's award-winning writer and director, Anne Hu, is here, and she will be joining us. Thank you so much, along with Nelson Marr, who works at the Bronx Legal Services, doing significant work in the Asian American community. To make sure that they receive the appropriate special education services. Chris Kwok, who is on our terrific adjunct Asian American Studies faculty, brought the event to Hunter. He will moderate the discussion on at least two topics deserving of more attention than they currently have, which is one, Asian Americans in special education, and then two, the critical role of arts in education. And we so appreciate their joining us tonight. I also want to extend thanks to Hunter's president, Jennifer Rabb, for her support of Asian American Studies at Hunter, her amazing team who've made this event possible. This is kind of also our first hybrid event. So thanks to Malky Schwartz, Liletta Beckett Nicholson, Jonathan Mena, Ryan Calderon, Jenny Tooten in the provost's office, and our provost Valida Dunt, to Gabriel Galindez, for doing the behind the scenes work, as always, for Asian American Studies, and to Hunter faculty Nancy Ng in speech language pathology and Bonnie Kilty in special education, and their respective departments for co-sponsoring. And thanks to Liz and Josh on the Confetti team. So as I mentioned, this is a hybrid event. So what we're going to do is we're going to pause the recording. We're going to screen the film, and folks in virtual attendance will be able to access the film to the link that they received. And then we'll come back together in the Zoom room for a discussion that Professor Kwok will moderate. All right?
Screen happened in my life. So it was really strange because as an immigrant, as a Chinese American, Asian American, I'm not used to seeing that in film. I'm not used to seeing my exact experience in film. And I thought, the first time I saw it, I thought, wow, I don't even expect to see these things in film. And now I'm beginning to see that for the first time. That generation post 65 that came to America, it's a difficult time when you land, and you don't usually then become a filmmaker 25 or 30 years in. But we're beginning to see that. I thought about Awkwafina a couple of years ago with Their Farewell. That I kind of think of as actually belonging in some of the same genre, of sort of the story of the immigrant, the recent immigrant in the last 40 or 50 years. Of course, the story of immigration from China and from Asia is longer than that, but I certainly see that within that context. Of course, there's so much in this film. There's so much richness. It's also in many ways, I think, a very Chinese film, if I might say. There's a very strong Chinese woman at the center of many Chinese films. If you've watched Zhang Yimou's films, very strong Chinese women, willful women, taking on the whole world for the people and the things they love. And I thought that sort of belongs squarely within sort of that genre as well. And there's so many themes within this film that reflect that. Separation of families in order for their children to have the best. That's a recurring theme within Chinese history, if you know it. And here it is sort of reflected on the modern stage. So let me bring it now, to our guests, because I've talked too long. But I wanted to give it to Anne to perhaps tell us a little bit. If we'll start with just tell us about the film, and you've seen it many times because you directed it. But what do you want people to take from it when they see it?
Hello, hi, thank you, first of all, for coming. And I really appreciate Vivian and the Hunter College and Chris and Nelson and everyone for making this happen and to give me a opportunity to reflect on the subject matter and also on my personal journey in a way. you asked about what actually I wanted this film to say, right? I think, like on many levels, the film, as you mentioned, that it dealt with, like immigrant, it's a immigrant story. It's a mother and daughter story. And it's about learning and dyslexia and also education. But I feel like, as far as I'm concerned, I think it's really about. It is about all those things. But for me, it's like about humanity in a way. I feel like the story worked because everyone helped a little. I think that's probably the fundamental thing that affected me, and I wanted, like people to feel. And so I think that's how that's my message.
Thank you. And I also thought of the Olympics because right now we're in the Winter Olympics, and were there parallels with Eileen Gu? I think some things of her of this of the story that we have from her, and there's all these sort of geopolitical debates about it, but that's not what it's about. But at the center of it, I see this very driven Chinese mother, who comes and then raises her as a single mom, and then with the help of her grandmother back in Beijing, and then does all this superwoman stuff, and she's flying up the hill right into Stanford. I see some sort of parallels once again of that parental love, and of course, the Chinese drive to succeed, in many ways, and to find sort of the realization for their children. And actually, to that end, we turn to Nelson. Nelson works in the Bronx, the Bronx Defenders Legal Services, and one of his I think main issues has been education law, and many different issues within education law, but I think one of them is special education and Asian Americans. So Nelson, tell us about sort of what thoughts are going through your head when you see this film.
Yeah. First of all, congratulations on a wonderful film. I think it really captures a lot of what parents go through when they're dealing with a child with special needs. I've been practicing education law for over 20 years now, representing families, mainly in the Bronx. Recently started a pro bono project representing Asian families in the city, in various parts of the city, especially like in Flushing and in Sunset Park, focused on helping families dealing with children with developmental disabilities, needs that I would say somewhat different from those needs of children with dyslexia. But I think, this movie captured a lot of the same concerns, the same, desires of those families that I've been working with over the last 5 years in that project. I think though, one thing that I would want to share is that, America does have a law that makes it, that actually can be very potent for parents who have children who need special education services. And that law can actually be used in a way to really benefit, a child like Mei Mei and other children with similar situations. And unfortunately, governments and school districts don't do a good job, following that law. So it's left to parents to have to try to really enforce it. And I think, the movie underscored how difficult it is for parents to do it alone. They really need help. And, thankfully, Mei Mei got it. And, I think, I oftentimes feel like, more can be done and more should be done, but there's just not enough people doing it. And, and obviously the bigger issue is getting government to do it right, getting the local school districts to do it right. And certainly some are doing it better than others, but I'll pass it back to Chris.
Thank you, Nelson. And and Nelson referred to the law which gives children the right to a proper education that meets them where they are. And really what that is it has evolved to a point where parents often have to litigate this issue and they have to advocate. And for people who do not speak English as their first language and do not know the system, they are not certainly as effective as they could be because they just don't know the system, or they're just too busy trying to earn a living, right? And that's sort of one of the things that certainly deals with it. And particularly in Asian families, you know, if children have issues or are not succeeding academically, and I would say this as a general broad, you know, generalization, that often they think it's not anybody else's fault except the kids or mine, and we just got to push them. We just got to push them, and if we push them, they're going to succeed. And perhaps there is also a cultural adjustment there that needs to happen. I don't know if Anne or Nelson will want to talk to that. Yeah.
I mean, I will certainly comment on that, you know, that those scenes where, you know, they brought in another student to translate, you know, at the public school, you know, that is unfortunately happens all too often. And, you know, Legal Services NYC, you know, the organization that I'm part of, you know, we actually sued New York City to ensure language access for students with disabilities. And hopefully they will be doing it better, and you won't have these situations repeating themselves, because that is arguably one of the worst things you can do to put a family through, you know, to have another child translate, let alone your child translate for you on such important matters, you know, like this.
Well, I would like to add one piece of good news. Through our effort to advocate, and we connected with the senator in New York State, where I lived. I mean, you know, like that I have a home there. And with us working together, he and another assemblyman in New York State, I mean, they put together to propose a bill and to request a mandatory evaluation of any kids before second grade to be evaluated, you know, like for learning disabilities. And if there's any problem, and if it's like you know, like if the kids needs help, and then the city, the government will, I mean, the state will provide the support. So I think that's a tremendous you know, thing that I didn't expect. I thought the film was just to raise awareness, and I still believe, you know, at this point, as a person who works in media, it's really about just to get a message across, and to push the message as far away as possible. The more the people who understand and who know, then, you know, the changes will come. But apparently, you know, like every single person counts. You know, every little bit counts. A screening like this, it counts a lot. So, you know, that's why, you know, like I really appreciate everyone being here.
No, that's wonderful. It's one. Nelson, did you have something you wanted to say? No. Vivian. Oh,
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure that the folks who were asking questions in the Zoom chat.
get a chance.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
want to speak on the microphone?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe you want to ask, if people want to ask
Yeah.
questions here.
Yeah, I mean, while Vivian gets us set up, I just wanted to comment that the art of the immigrant is vitally important. And that is something that is often considered a luxury for those that are in the first stages of immigration. But I think that, you know, through writing, filmmaking, which is expensive, or even writing, which is cheaper, you can do it at home and fit it in, through art, literature, narrative, where we tell our story, where we can get into the political scene, that is very powerful. We don't often think of that, particularly Chinese immigrants or immigrants, because you know what? Survival is the first and foremost goal in the first generation, and then other things sort of come. But I think the quicker we get to being able to share our story, tell it through art, we can tell this human story. And that's important. It's amazing and great to hear of the legislative changes that are coming about as a result. Vivian, thanks.
Thank you so much, Chris, Nelson, and Anne. And thank you to the audience here, but also we've had 3 questions so far.
Mm.
The first question I leave it open to you about what are the similarities?
Apparently, I'm the only person who has the experience of teachers in both countries. And I feel, teachers here, especially in the special education schools, the teachers are pretty sophisticated already, and they know what to do. They know how to talk to the kids, and actually, they got training almost like every week, every month, as to how to really best communicate with the students. And I was very impressed. And I think in China, the awareness level is probably next to zero. Not only teachers that are not available, even the people who are in charge of education in the country, or people who are in like education specialist. And I guess, like probably the entire country you can count, like maybe just including all the specialists and also training centers and everything. Probably, I can probably confidently say it's probably less than 200, 500 people. I guess that's like are aware of this situation. And so it's like it's the time to show films like this, instead of trying to, just I guess, like try to connect on a smaller level. And but the statistics here, I think it's very different. I know that in the US, for example, that 50% of our inmates in prisons, in US prisons, are dyslexia. And the of all the divorced couples, 80% of them that have children who are like special needs kind of children, so they end up like being divorced. So it's like so intervention and also awareness will help a lot. A father came to me saying, like if I had known this, I would not have divorced like 10 years ago. If I had watched this, like earlier. And a kid came to me and saying, like now I know I'm okay now. I know what I am. Almost like if you're a gay person, you know who I am, you are much more comfortable. And about learning disability or about dyslexia, it's sort of like the same thing.
Yeah, I do want to say that yes, I think without a doubt, America, partly because there is that law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So school districts have to really understand the various disabilities that are out there that affect children. But the challenge is really also ensuring that they do it, and I sort of have to keep coming back to that because that's seen in the school where they said, we tried all these different things. that happens just all too often when, instead of doing the right thing, which is, conduct an evaluation and maybe even a more intensive evaluation like the neuropsychological that ultimately the family did get in the film. Those are all things that, again, we need to find a way to get school districts to do that better, and not have to wait until a family has to fight for it,
Yeah, and if I might just to wrap that up, what a lot of the therapies in our society are actually in America are actually very new. They're really, as a professionalization really came post World War II. A lot of actually began by FDR when he was disabled and said, well, like, help me get better. How do I get a walk? And people were coming back from World War II and they were injured, and there was no sort of, helping, medical therapy to help them. And so our physical therapy, and all the other related therapies really arose as a profession post World War II. And I say that just as to say it's new in America, and China had its own issues and really didn't go on its own path to become normalized until really 1979, and then did not really reach a middle income status until about probably 2008. So just as a matter of just timing and what's happening in society, economically and socially, one can understand sort of the differential sort of like things that are available. I think of also Mayor Adams, who's also dyslexic, who, if you understand sort of where he's come from, how he was diagnosed, and the incredible personal strength that took him to reach his understanding and to become who he is. And I've met him, and he's an amazing guy, right? And he's about to begin a school only for dyslexia with students in New York City, right? And so that's going to be, I think, a wonderful resource, because specialized schools that focus on that, they're going to be wonderful for those kids, I think. So yeah, and also a CUNY alum, right? City Tech. So there you go. Yeah.
Wonderful. So a student, Joy Ng, who's also writing a piece on this, and this article, she had two questions, but I'm going to post the ones that she had addressed first. And there are a whole bunch of questions, and for you, but let me just first. And so her question is, and I'm just paraphrasing, how do race and citizenship status affect the process of having your special education identified and met? So it's a two-part. So that's one. And then the second part was, how does that also relate to the model minority stereotype that surrounds Asian Americans?
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly there are challenges with regards to recent immigrants, people who are non-native English speakers, because a lot of times that issue could be seen as a English learning English issue. But with regards to the rights of the student in New York City, citizenship does not affect your ability to get an education. So anyone who's a resident in New York City can go to the nearest local school and enroll there, and they have a right to an education between the ages of 3 and 21. And children have a right to also access special education services if they have a disability that requires, special education services. But the bigger issues that the second part of that question talks about are probably the deeper challenges, because without a doubt, there is implicit bias that exists amongst teachers. And certainly when they see an Asian student, they often assume, oh, that child's going to be polite, that child's going to be compliant, they're not going to make a problem. And if they're quiet, that's fine. When at times that could be really just masking, a learning disability or some other issues. So that certainly plays a big factor in some of the cases I've had to deal with as well. And certainly cultural competency is an issue too, understanding that sometimes families are dealing with all these stresses of being an immigrant, dealing with the cultures, if people can't actually help their child with their homework because they're working, 4 or 5 different jobs, as was the case in this movie. So yeah.
And I think it goes back to something I sort of mentioned briefly earlier, that a lot of Asian parents, once again, painting with a very broad brush, if there are issues with their child, they will believe that it's their fault or their child's fault, and that is no one else's. And that, and that might fall into the model minority sort of like issue, where they're not looking for other issues, other problems that might be dealt with or explained in a different way. And so, for the child, it can be very, very hard to bear. And that can destroy some children, that pressure, and the other issues, Nelson has spoken to. And, New York City Board of Education is the largest school system in the country, with 1 million students. And there are a lot of social issues, problems, and the educators and the administrators have a lot on their plate. And they have good funding relatively. This is not, we spend 39 billion dollars budget yearly in New York City. Yeah, it's a lot of money, but and I think to Nelson's point, how is it being carried out? Are we putting it out there in the right way? Are people being served? That's the really, really hard, policy question we have before us. And I think that we ensure greater success and likelihood of success by being an engaged citizenry, by having people like Nelson and myself who grew up here mostly. Well, I immigrated. I think Nelson was born here. Be engaged citizens and try to help the people that we're a part of community of. And that's the only way we can try to make things a little bit better. So.
Yeah, that's so well put. And another question from the virtual audience from our colleague, John Chen. Anne, how did you decide to make the film? And then I'm going to follow up with the questions of two other people. Also, why Confetti? Meaning the term, the title.
I became a mother 16 years ago, and my daughter opened up this window for me, and we took on this journey. And so everything sort of like happening in the film, I went through either through my personal experience or witnessing other mothers and families, what they are going through. So I guess, and then suddenly my daughter became a teenager, like she's, when she was like 12, she really didn't think she didn't need me anymore almost. And I'm a filmmaker, I make films. And I feel like, and this script came together very easily. Some of the films, like scripts, I would have to work for years and it still wouldn't go through. And this one, it was like it only took me 2 months to really, to have a full draft, and it was working. The story seemed to be getting somewhere. So I guess then it became it became a natural story to tell. And but the little I know was that actually it was a very difficult film to make, and I went through so much ups and downs, and eventually it brought me to discoveries after discoveries. So I think it was a journey, by itself, and it's a story, it has its own life almost. And as to the second question, why Confetti? I just feel like each of us has this multifaceted kind of a talent and a uniqueness. And dyslexia could be a bless as well, because those people, they naturally think different. It was a skill, regardless how much I tried, I wouldn't be able to, to do what my daughter is able to do. And I do envy her in many ways. It's just like, how are you going to accommodate her to bring those talents out? And so I feel like by and large, people tend to judge and evaluate, judge people who are different. And we tend to choose the ways we like, and we think that's the world should be. But as a matter of fact, I think all these people, as the film mentioned, they brought huge changes that, Steve Jobs and, Picasso and Churchill and, Richard Branson and Edison and, Spielberg. And I mean, the name just went on and on. And those people are having a special kind of a talent. And if you choose to celebrate it, then it gives you a world that's full of varieties, and which I feel is kind of like we can allow ourselves to live in a world of confetti where the magic happens all the time. I feel like but I mean, I refer to a scene in this film, which is my personal favorite scene, was that when Mei Mei was like looking out of this window in school through the bars, and then you cut back. I mean, then you see it was a garbage can. I mean, what can you make of that garbage can, right? And also there are those trashes, which are probably some people after they cut it, they just throw it down. It was already garbage putting in. And then you cut back, the classroom was like, she was so marginalized by the window, and the rest of the classroom was like a huge pressure almost, I feel. Like that's the world Mimi lives in, that's the world every one of us lives in. And then you cut to those confetti that they're all disappearing into the crowd, I mean into the fog. So I feel that just explains everything in this world that we are living. I mean, it's a choice, I feel.
We have a question.
Okay.
Yeah, well, actually, what I was going to ask about symbolism, and one piece of it was confetti, but the other part was the walnuts. So my reading was that the walnuts were symbolic of the comforts of home, but then in the scene late in the movie where she smashes it, I thought maybe it was also symbolic of a tough nut to crack. And I wondered if there's a similar expression in Chinese.
Thank you. I guess by Chinese culture, I'm sure you're familiar as well, that people think the brain and the walnut are sort of like related. And if you don't think you're smart enough, or you feel your mind has been drained up, or anyway, I mean, walnuts help. Okay, so I guess, but what actually Lan's problem deep down is that she believes her her mind is not really working properly. She's not normal, and so this is her deepest self-worth problem. It's like she's nothing unless she gets this fix. So her entire journey is like working around that. So she tries to sort of like taking the walnuts to bring herself out of this horrible curse. And but after everything she tried, and it didn't work out. So basically, she was so frustrated, and she was at the point of giving up. And by smashing that, she's basically just like denying or forever closing up that effort, I guess, that desire. So she's almost like she gave up. I think that was the point of no return in a way for her.
Like she was like banging her head against the wall,
Yeah.
by
Right.
smashing the walnut. Because there's a very, it's a very Chinese way of looking at foodstuffs. Within Chinese sort of eating tradition, it's a very old sort of tradition that has deep beliefs in Taoism and Buddhism, where like if you eat like the deer penis, it'll help with your sexual sort of powers. But if you eat the walnut, which looks like a brain, it will increase your brain function. And those kind of metaphors are deep within sort of Chinese culture. So
It probably
yeah.
does.
because she's like, yeah, right? Yeah, so of course.
I think one of does.
That's right. Thank you. Okay.
Yes, and so this is a question from Rocky Chen, which is, given the stigma, I'm paraphrasing, that's okay. Given the stigma that's attached to
I think Chris sort of hit on it before. It's incumbent upon all of us to highlight this issue, that to do as much as we can to break down the model minority myth, that that's absolutely not true for every single Asian American student. And I think it's really important to support our family members if they're going through things like this, because as was mentioned, there's a terrible stigma within the Asian American community, within the Chinese American community, about disabilities, about psychological difficulties, things along those lines, that that we really do need to have those hard conversations.
Yeah, no, I mean, I had a friend, whose child was had Down syndrome, and it was clear maybe 2 or 3 years in from the pictures that the child had Down syndrome. But I was talking to another friend. I said, "Oh, the child is Down syndrome, and they're like, we don't talk about it. He doesn't want to talk about it." I was like, "Okay," but I was like, they shouldn't be so, like, it could not even be mentioned. And I felt sad that they felt that way. This is not my battle, right? I didn't have that, but I wanted to be like, I would like to get to a point where it can be like, that's wonderful. Like, what can we, like, yeah, I had another friend whose child and had some disability, I don't know what, and we were talking about it. And I think part of what we can do is to be like, not be like, oh, that's so terrible. No, it's just like, great. Well, how does she achieve what she's going to be able to achieve? Right. And, Nelson and I both have young children. I have a 2-year-old daughter. I live in Manhattan, and we're sending her to preschool at 2, right? And there's all this sort of like very strong pressure to like continue to like private school, and like, Nelson and I grew up a block from each other in Whitestone, Queens, went through the same K through 12. I think we did pretty good. I think we are doing pretty good. And I want to resist this pressure to feel like we've got to be on this like hamster wheel, particularly living in Manhattan. Like the preschools, like, we send all our kids to Trinity. I'm like, who cares? Like, really? Let's have like, some sense of self, where for my 2-year-old who's really hyper and might be ADHD. And when I said that to my wife, she kind of went like, what? You think she's ADHD? I was like, yeah, well, that just means that she can do a lot of things at a high level all at the same time. So let's just like not think of it as a sort of like thing. Let's celebrate and help her. Yeah.
Well, I've done a lot of Q&As and screening discussions like this, and this question does come up a lot, and many reporters actually ask the same kind of question. And the thing is, why or is Asian communities or Chinese communities specifically feel more stigma than the rest of the society here? The thing is, yes, it is, but I think there are many reasons for that. And I think the biggest reason really comes from the 5,000 years of civilization. And the culture itself has never stopped. And it's like so complicated, and, it's beyond, I think it's really beyond the imagination of the people who don't have it. And in our education, and it's actually, people think shame is the beginning of learning, and it's the beginning of being aware of your situation. Then it turns into courage, and then you become more wise, and so on. So it is the first step for going forward. And also it's because you are more learned and you are more aware. And so to be aware of the shame, to feel the shame is so important, actually, as the first step. But whether that works nowadays in the modern society, and whether we should be, and what are the things we should feel shameful about, it's like, I think my personal experience is that in this country, in the Western country, people are like more into like personal internal growth in a way that they not just internal growth through Buddhism, for example, like in China, people are also getting into tremendous internal growth. But here people tend to, get into psychology, and then you get professional help. And there are a lot of people who are really studying this and then bringing it to a scientific level. And so people are dealing with it with much less kind of, and they don't really feel that personal. They don't feel this is something you did wrong. It was not your fault. Therefore, it deserves the social support, and also everyone's to care about this, to support you. So I think there's just too many reasons for this. But I do agree with you too that, I think we need to sort of think of the Chinese communities here with a kind of sensitivity, comparing with the normal. I mean, but still, I know, for example, in my daughter's school, the parents, many of them are still feel shameful, for example, about their children. So they don't want to advertise about this. They don't want to promote the cause because they don't want people to know that my children are in a special education school. I mean, so I think, it's it's around. So we just need to deal with that.
Yeah. If I can just get on my soapbox for a quick second, I think, one thing the Asian American community could do is maybe spend a little less time talking about the specialized high school issue and talk about, the needs of those students within the community that have special needs. Certainly, I would love to highlight, an organization that I've been involved with now for the better part of 5 years, Alliance for Families with Developmental Needs out in Queens. And they represent families who have children with developmental disabilities. And if you could imagine how difficult it is to deal with like a learning disability, well, think how hard it is with like autism or intellectual disability. So those parents feel even more shame and are far, more likely to try to keep everything under, the rug. So, but these are some amazing parents out there who are trying to do their best to advocate for more appropriate services for those students and for greater acceptance within the community. So, so that's certainly one thing that we could do. And I do also want to say that, yes, I do see how much of a stigma it is within the Chinese culture, but having worked with families from the Dominican Republic, families from West Africa, it's pretty serious there too, so there is a lot of similarity as opposed to differences, I think.
Yeah. This is really interesting, and Vivian is an education scholar, and we were having this discussion on Friday at a symposium that we were talking about. And I'm happy never to talk about specialized high schools again, so as long as the test stays, as an inside joke. But it's even more than 5,000 years of Chinese history. It's 1,200 years of the standardized examination in China, which China invented in order to serve the emperor. So you could be a nobody, study well on a test, and make your way to serve the emperor if you scored number one on your regional, village, state, and then Emperor's Hall. And at the same time, if you think about it in the historical context, Europe was patronage. Who do you know? Who's going to recommend you? Who's going to give you the recommendation? So China's sort of civil bureaucracy and fairness was far ahead the West. If you look at it at that time, that idea made its way to the West through India, through the British East India Company. And that's something that is not well told. That itself in China, and then how it spread to Asia, is a very important understanding to why Chinese culture in particular places so much on academic achievement. Because it's hard to imagine what scoring number one used to mean back in China, but it used to mean you didn't have to pay taxes. Your entire family would be elevated. you would get to put a flag in front of your family compound. You would become an instant millionaire for the rest of your life. It was hard to imagine what people put into that test and the student that was good. And back then, the student could take it over and over again until he passed. No women were allowed to take the test, only men. So they could take the test for 2 decades. And it's not so much, I think, that Asians or Chinese are missing anything. As a matter of fact, Zen Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, all philosophical concepts that were, developed in China, right? It's the West that has economically been successful and had wealth and had time to develop these wonderful ideas that we need to learn from and to incorporate and to take into account. But but there are, I think, if we look at history and the narrative, we can sort of pretty easily see where we came from, what happened, and then what we need to do and how we might move forward in a more humane and caring way, where we don't squash the kids that don't do well in school, because there's a million other things they can do well too.
So just actually the final question is mine, if that's okay. And then I'll just close it out. Thanking all of the audience. But so the final question I have are for all of you actually, but why don't we start with Leon, which is the whole idea of activism through the arts. I think that's been a major theme, certainly at this series at Hunter. But I was interested in how you see yourself as an advocate, as an activist, and as an artist through the arts. And then, and final reflections as well. That sound all right?
Sounds great.
Well, for me, it is almost like a personal struggle lately, because I spent a lot of time promoting this film instead of doing my, other projects which are in the pipeline, and my producer was pushing me all the time, saying, "Hey, Anne, you are a filmmaker, come back," And but the thing is, while I was doing this, and actually I went to Africa, as you know, like lately, and we actually there's a because of the effort, and there's going to be a concert for the first time, and under the name of Confetti World, and also the concept of special education will be brought to the local schools. And so at the time I came back, going through the custom, and the officer was looking at my passport, saying, "So where you came back from?" And I said, "Senegal." He said, "So how long you are away?" I said, 2 weeks. And he said, "What are you doing there?" I said, "Working." And he said, "What kind of work?" Normally I would say, "Well, I'm a filmmaker. I was doing research on my project," and so on, so forth. So this time, somehow just by instinct, I said, humanitarian support. So so the officer right away, it's like you can see this change from defensive and kind of like almost uptight to suddenly dissolve into a much kinder, relaxed person. And I never said that I was a humanitarian activist before, but at that moment I just felt like I was elevated suddenly. So I feel like somehow, and also people I have been dealing with in this field than in the art field, is that people come here to help, to support, and it come from a feeling wanting to love. And so you just feel like a lot more happiness here. So for me, it's a personal struggle. I will continue to do. If you are familiar with my previous work, I really feel like to do what you're really authentically feeling, and then people will probably feel connected to it. As to the meaning of it, that's like I guess that's other people's, like a whole, they will figure out why the art works, in what level, why, in what way. I think that's like a scholars. I know they will tell me. I mean, they will have the proper interpretation. Right. Mm.
I guess you know, I would have to say that, you know, congratulations again,
Oh,
you
thank
know, on a wonderful movie. I think it really captured the essence of, you know, the struggle to get, you know, appropriate education for a child with a disability. Um, you know, it really does yeah, it really does show a lot of what I've seen families go through. I could sort of really empathize with Helen because I could see myself in her, you know, working with my clients through this process so many times. And I think that you know, it also shows the rich, you know, immigration experience that a lot of immigrants go through. Coming to America for various reasons. But for a lot of people, it is about trying to find a better opportunity for their children, whether it's, you know, because they can get a better job or they can find a better education for their child. So I think, you know, for all those reasons, it's a wonderful movie that really touched me.
Yeah, no, and it's been wonderful, you know, to spend time, you know, with people here in the room and online. It's cool. It's new. Still getting used to it. But you know, really just being honest and doing what you like, and then being honest about and sharing with others is really key to, I think, being productive and to doing so that you feel good inside. You know, when I graduated law school, I didn't work for 2 years because I couldn't find a job. And for a long time, I didn't share about it. I was on a career panel about 12 years in, and I shared about it because I was like, well, I just tell people the truth. Well, there's nothing wrong about it. So freeing, you know, because people might feel when they saw me, like, you know, because of the leader or is he successful or whatever. I was like, "Well, I want to share with you where I failed and about how, you know, how I made my way through it. You know, how the people in the community and other communities, African Americans and Jews and all these other people, you know, gave me a hand, helped me achieve things to help myself and others. And now I turn around and I'm sharing that with you. And that just propelled me like so far, like being open about failure and about being honest. And people go, well, yeah, because they have their failures too. We all feel we need to cover up these failures in order to present, right? But if we present ourselves and we're comfortable with ourselves, that allowed me to work in the community in a way I had never imagined. And I see it in Anne's film, in art. And for me, it's really politics or public policy or community engagement, whatever you want to call it. So I'm expressing it in that way. And collaboration through that, even with people you disagree with and that you don't always agree with, is so important because you're working together to advance it. So collaboration is key to that as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you
Okay.
so much. Congratulations to
Thank you.
Anne again on such an
Yeah.
amazing film. So moving, and thank you for sharing it with us. Thank you to Nelson and to Chris for sharing their thoughts and being with us tonight and sharing their insights. Thanks to all of you. This is kind of an extra long event. And thanks for staying with
Kudos.
us and for being
Yeah.
with us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank
See
you.
again later in
Yeah.
spring.
Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you for coming.